Maybe when it's open, Jonathan would want to come up and try the ski jump.
Sign me up.
What we're talking
Number
about.
of times that I asked my dad if I could climb up on that thing when we drove by.
Yeah. As kids, we used to climb all the way up the landing, but definitely not the structure.
Well, Susan indicated to us that she's going to be about a half hour late. So let's just wait a little bit to see if David is going to join us. I'm probably not, because he's probably pretty much
is
trying
great.
to
Yeah.
get school going. Has it calmed down for him over there on the seacoast? Have you noticed?
No.
No, really?
The superintendents are really on the fry pan.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes you say that if everybody's angry at you, you must be doing something right. But I think this time around,
Oh, I don't know.
if everybody's angry at you, everybody's angry at you. It's
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
impossible. Impossible.
I'm going to give it a couple more minutes and then we'll start. John, you have what, two young boys?
3, actually. No,
What are the ages?
8, 5, and 2.5.
Whoa, you got your hands full.
Yeah, that's an understatement.
That's a good age spread.
We have a blast, to be clear, but it does make it hard to focus on professional things from time to time.
Well, my wife has always said there's a reason why young families have young children.
Absolutely. I just shipped 2 out this morning.
Why don't we get started? David probably is not going to be able to join us. He's got other things to do. So let me call the work group together August 31st in accordance with the governor's order. Let's take a roll call. This is Mel Myler calling from Port Clyde, Maine. Corrine?
Corinne Cascadden from Berlin, New Hampshire.
John Morgan.
John Morgan from Brentwood, New Hampshire.
And we have Dave Luno join us, Chair of the Commission.
Dave Luno, reporting from Hopkinton.
And we have Bruce Mallory.
Yep, and Kittery Point at home alone.
Dr. Carey.
Carrie Poetry, Dover. My husband's in the other room.
Ms. Bogey.
Sarah Bogey in Dover, New Hampshire.
And Jordan Hensley.
The future Mr. Bogey, also in Dover, New Hampshire, in the other room.
Very, very, very good. So this session is being recorded. We'll not be able to take any kind of public comments, but any public comments can be made or questions raised at the CARC website, and we will respond to those accordingly. So today, one of the issues that we're going to be dealing with on this community engagement is a report from both Carrie and Sarah regarding the report from the educator survey that was conducted at the end of June, first part of September, first part of July. So Carrie, why don't I just turn it over to you, and you can kind of walk us through what the findings were of that particular survey.
Okay, do you want to approve the notes from last time, or we
Sure, would
don't-
somebody like to move that?
I'll move it. We
Moved
approve
by
it.
Corrine, seconded by John. All those in favor have to vote. I say aye. Corrine?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Okay, passed. All right, thank you, Carrie.
So Sarah and I are going to talk about the findings from the first part of the survey, which are closed-ended questions, and share some quotes from the survey from the open-ended questions. We'll share the second part of this report, which are all the open-ended questions on, well, Sarah and I will prepare the report, and then I'll share it with you all on September 14th. So today we're just going to share some findings from the first part, which I think, based on the discussions the commission has been having, the different community members that you've talked to, thinking about the fiscal policy meeting this morning, there will be some alignments and some information here that will spark further discussion. Sarah, you can. So as Mel said, in July 2020, we sent out a survey to school and district leaders and associations throughout the state, helped distribute it to school and district employees. We developed the survey in consultation with this work group. It was a 15-question survey and was active for approximately 2 weeks. Again, there was 1,768 employees who completed the survey. We want to be clear that although this is a really amazing response from school district employees, it's not representative of the state. This isn't a randomized sample or anything. This is just who decided to respond based on who received the email from the distribution that we put out through school and district leaders and associations. So these responses to the closed-ended questions have been analyzed and organized by equalized property valuation per pupil, which in short we're calling EVPP, of the districts that respondents lived in and work in. So this just is a very simple figure. It just shows that the majority of the respondents were property owners, and fewer were out-of-state property owners, renters, noted in other type of living arrangement, or didn't answer the question. The answers were not forced response. People could choose what they chose to share. And I'll say, like, the purpose of this survey is really to see what the patterns are in people's thinking. That responded to the survey. These are school and district employees, but they're also, in this case, property owners. And so they're thinking about this in terms of the districts they live in and the districts they work in, can show us some patterns and help the commission as it's looking through the data, hearing presentations, and looking at AIR's models or model. So the respondents living and working in the same district, so there's about, there's a little bit more who live and work in different districts who responded than live and work in the same district. So types of communities that are represented, a little less than half were rural only, so they considered their districts to have rural communities. These are descriptions that we put in front of them in the survey and they selected themselves. And then about 20% were suburban only or a mix of community types, and then 10% of respondents were urban only, or considered their districts urban only. And so from this you can see kind of what the distribution of respondents were. The majority of respondents were teachers or identified as teachers or educators at the elementary, high school, or middle school level. All district or SAU often were administrators, so we have a small percentage of administrators who responded. And then other people identified kind of a mix of roles. So maybe they did middle school and high school, elementary and middle school. We had representation from preschool as well. And so then this again shows kind of the positions of the respondents based on a list we provided. Not everyone answered. Some people left this blank, which we afforded them the option. And so as you can see, most of the respondents were classroom teachers or educators, and then moving down, special educators, administrators, or support staff.
Okay, so as Carrie had mentioned earlier, we did do some analysis based on EVPP, or Equalized Property Valuation per Pupil, which is information that's available from the state of New Hampshire. It's collected essentially on property value per the number of students in that community. So it kind of gives us a sense of property wealth in those communities. And in order to categorize these in a more meaningful way, since they're dollar amounts listed for each district, we categorize them as the following. So a low EVPP district was under $800,000, medium was $800,000 to 1.2 million, and high is 1.2 million and above. And then we'd also like to note that charter schools did not have an EVPP available, mostly because students are able to come from a variety of districts and just sort of how charter schools are set up. And then there were some other districts for which EVPP was not available, which includes Dresden, Prospect Mountain, JMA, Co-Brown Northwood Academy, and Pinkerton Academy. So just a few exceptions there, but most were able to be categorized into low, medium, or high. And this just sort of gives an overview of that. So this looks at the EVPP levels of the districts that respondents work in. So our survey respondents were asked to identify both the district they live in and the district they work in. And we do analysis by both district they live in and district they work in. About 137 districts were represented among those who responded to the question about working in a district, and 149 districts were identified that folks live in. So quite a range of districts. So obviously it's kind of simplified here looking at the low, medium, high EVPP values, but do want to note that this represents quite a few districts across the state.
Sarah.
Yeah.
Mel's okay if I ask a question on this?
Absolutely, yeah.
So how does the low, medium, high spread correspond to the number of school districts that are low, medium, and high?
Like how does our sample compare with the state?
Well, I'm just saying, like of 200 school districts, how many are low, how many are medium, how many are high, and how does this, are most school districts medium?
Yes, most are medium. So we don't have the findings presented here by district. We have it presented by respondents, but you can still kind of get a sense of that. So we have 880 respondents from medium EVPP districts, and then fewer, but still a significant amount from low EVPP districts, 465, and then 319 from high EVPP districts. So you do get a sense that we have far more respondents from medium EVPP districts, but far more of the districts are of medium EVPP.
If I might just put that in a statistical question, and you won't mind that, will you?
No.
How representative is the population in the survey?
So that's a great question. We have not compared any of the data here from the survey to state data. Like we haven't looked at anything. I mean, we certainly could compare it, especially EVPP would be fairly easy to compare to the state overall, but we have not done that in this analysis yet.
It might be useful.
Yeah.
I mean, I had the same question as I looked at the table as what David asked.
Yeah, great. Thank you. That's good to know. Okay, so we'll include that. And then there's a similar distribution regarding the EVPP levels of the districts that respondents live in. So again, the most concentrated in the medium EVPP districts, with fewer in the low and high. And I do want to note we had a significant number of missing on this question. A lot of questions we only had maybe 10 or 12 respondents who didn't answer, and there were 100 who left this one blank. We think that that's likely because they filled in the district they work in, and then they work and live in the same district, so they just left the second one blank. But since we can't confirm that, they might have left it blank for a different reason. We've had to just leave those as missing. So I did want to note that there may be more people who work and live in the same district than we've identified. That might be an underrepresentation. And then we're going to go through some of these close-ended questions and just look at some of the general trends and patterns. So respondents were asked to indicate the level of satisfaction with the resources available in their district. So we looked at this question by the EVPP of the district respondents work in as well as live in. So this first figure is just looking at the EVPP of the district's respondents work in. And we can see that overall, looking at low, medium, high EVPP, charter schools, other districts, and also among missing districts, we see that there's more of a trend towards somewhat satisfied in particular, but also some in extremely satisfied, some in neither satisfied nor dissatisfied, and some representation in somewhat dissatisfied, but not very much in extremely dissatisfied. So kind of the overall trend is trending a little bit more towards somewhat medium satisfied overall with the level of resources available. Then we see a fairly similar trend when we looked at it by the EVPP of the district respondents live in. We see a little bit more concentration in the somewhat dissatisfied, but still overall quite a few folks saying that they're extremely or somewhat satisfied with the level of resources available in their district. So overall, a more positive feeling, a more positive rating of satisfaction level here.
So we pulled out some of the quotes from the open-ended questions to kind of show a sense of what people are saying about the resources available based on these satisfaction ratings. So I'll just read them out loud. And there are a number of quotes available, and we'll share more in the full report in the presentation next time. We need to recognize that all of our students do not come into the district with the same resources and backgrounds. There have to be additional resources for kids who start out with fewer. Otherwise, they are behind from the beginning. All kids in New Hampshire should have equal access to higher education and advanced study, but if they start out behind, how will they ever catch up? And so this is a Contoocook Valley employee and resident. There is so much that goes into quality education, but what I think is most important is equity between districts. Children do not choose where they live, and there are some schools that provide many more resources to their students than others, simply because they can't afford them. I understand there is no easy solution to this, but this is how I feel as a Concord resident. The district I live offers base adequacy. The district I work in goes above and beyond meeting students' needs. A Henniker employee and a Goffstown resident. Students in our poorer communities do not have the same access to programs and supports that our more affluent communities do. More equity funding could help students change their prospects in life. This was a White Mountains regional employee and resident. I work in a public charter school in Manchester. The funding we get per student is inadequate, to say the least. We work with a population that is considered highest risk in the state. The district gives up on them, sends them to us, people who never give up on a child for not even half the money they are collecting for that child. This is a charter school employee and a Manchester resident. The most important factors are that school districts be funded the same way. It should not be lower in property poor towns and higher in property rich towns. The state has failed in adequate funding, and now the state is cutting short the very districts that need it the most. My district is losing thousands. Do you know what that could pay for? That's a Pittsfield employee and resident. These are just a few examples from the findings and from some of the comments that respondents have made. And we'll talk a little bit more about that next time, but we wanted to provide some of these quotes to you.
Yeah, thanks, Carrie. So now moving on to opinions of how well the current funding system works for the community respondents work in. Let's see, respondents were asked 2 questions and we've broken it down accordingly. So at first they were asked to rank how well they thought the current funding system was working for the community that they work in. And the next question was about the community that they live in. So in these instances, so for the one asking about how well they think the current funding system works for the community that they work in, we've just analyzed that by the EVPP of the district that the respondent works in. And subsequently for the next question, asking them to rate how well the current funding system works for the community they live in, we've analyzed that just by the type of EVPP of the district they live in. So this is for the first one, for the EVPP of the district the respondent works in. And here we see a much less positive overall story. So skewing a lot more towards not well at all, slightly well, or moderately well, with few responses in extremely well, and also few responses in not sure. So here we've included, these are the number of respondents from the different types of EVPP districts or charter schools or other districts that have responded extremely well, very well, moderately well, slightly well, etc. But I will note that
I'm just going to interrupt for a minute. And we also have the percentages. We went back and forth about what to share here. So we do have images of the percentages as well, which we'll include for all of you.
Yes, yeah, thanks. Yeah, the percentages show a similar but slightly different story, like charter schools for not well at all. 16 folks who work at a charter school responded not well at all, but that 16 is out of only 27. So that's a much larger percentage of folks working in charter schools than it seems at first glance here, just looking at the counts. Whereas the medium EVPP folks, that's 264 out of 880. So the percentages will just sort of be another way to show these distributions. Since we do have such large categories as medium EVPP, which is 880 respondents, and then we also have 4 from other districts and 27 from charter schools. So that'll just show a little bit more of the nuance there, but overall the major pattern, the major story is the same, where folks are identifying that the current funding system works moderately well, slightly well, or not well at all for the community that they work in. So this is then the next question, looking at their opinion of how well the current funding system works for the community that they live in by the EVPP of the district that the respondent lives in. And this is very similar. Again, we see a lot more skewing towards not well at all, slightly well, or moderately well. There are a few more not sure, which may be because this is asking about the community they live in versus the community they work in. They might be more familiar with the resources of the district that they work in versus that they live in. But overall, few responses saying that it works extremely well.
So these are some quotes again from the open-ended questions that are focused on the funding formula. So consistency in the funding formula. The past few years where the adequacy funding was reduced was incredibly unfair. Our city is committed to a strong education. The taxpayers will support our schools. But when the state reduces its support arbitrarily and with the greatest impact on the poorest cities, that is impossible to plan for. As a result, we cut programs, teachers, staffing, investments to manage our tax rate and make up for the reduction in adequacy funding. This is a Claremont employee and resident. Funding should be determined by using a formula that provides school districts with a certain amount of money per student, regardless of the towns that they reside in. There should be an overhaul of the funding formula that doesn't place such an enormous burden on property owners and be filtered through the state system rather than at the local level. That's a Dunbarton employee and resident. The state of New Hampshire desperately needs an income tax because the wealthy districts provide a much better education. This includes number of students in a class, salaries for employees, maintenance for buildings, technology for staff and students, etc. This is a Portsmouth employee and resident. And I will note that quite a few of the open-ended responses listed the different kind of what I come to understand from the conversations I've listened to as inputs into the formula. And so when we talk about the report, that these areas will come up a little more with more substantial explanation of what school and district employees are thinking about. I can read the next slide, Sarah. The districts I work at had a high tax rate, yet fewer homeowners. 60% of the kids I serve are poverty level, and we get much less funding than the district I live in. This is a Somersworth employee and a Hampton resident. Property-rich towns such as lakefront towns have much lower taxes, and therefore this inhibits an equal opportunity for an adequate education because residents in those towns would pay less in property taxes than those in poorer, not property-rich towns. In our small community, there is little revenue coming in from any type of commerce, so the residents have to foot the entire bill for education via property taxes. If there was a more equitable funding solution, everyone would benefit because then property poor towns wouldn't have to pay so much. This is an Andover employee and resident. Providing an equal educational opportunity to every New Hampshire child, regardless of the community they live in, that community's economic situation, and the family's financial position, basing school funding on property taxes does not address the students' needs at all. It's a Fall Mountain Regional employee, Mascoma Valley Regional resident. Opportunity should be tied to zip code. The current system fails students in towns with a weak property tax base, and that was an Oyster River cooperative employee, Rye resident. And these quotes really talking about the funding formula, that is something we coded for in the open-ended analysis, is general comments about the funding formula. And these were common sentiments that respondents expressed. So, you know, this is preliminary analysis of this data. There's quite a bit of analyses that could be done. And so I think what we're looking for from the work group is, you know, what stands out so far? How do these perspectives connect to research and presentations and the discussions that have taken place in the commission's work? How do these findings inform the fiscal policy and adequacy learning and discussions and inform next steps? Also, we're interested to hear if there are some other types of analyses you'd like us to do within the context of this data, realizing that time is crunched a little bit as we move into other engagement activities in terms of analysis and report writing. So we can unshare a screen and open it up for discussion.
Well, thank you, Carrie and Sarah, for that analysis. What are some comments that are people feeling as they look at some of this data?
Just quickly for me, before I switch mediums here, is the recognition that of local property taxes are being taxed in so many different towns. It was nice to see quite a smattering of different communities from all over the state responding, but it sounds like they get it, that, you know, there is some substantial differences because of what local communities can raise for property tax. And it sounds like that's a concern. And then the other thing that equality or equity in terms of offering programs. People
I thought
recognize that.
I thought the way you cut the data with the various levels of property value was an interesting look. I don't think we've done that before, so that, I thought I liked that.
Mel,
Yeah.
I'm wondering if you can take out of this any findings relative to, I don't know what you'd call it, qualitative differences between a local property tax and a statewide uniform property tax. Is there anything that might be able to be pulled out of the data along those lines?
Say again in terms of statewide.
So like, yeah, so a lot of people seem to, of the comments that you read, but I'm assuming there's more, comments. Well, you said that there's a lot more comments. That there seemed to be some connection between tax equity or lack of tax equity in a property tax. It would seem that would relate more towards a local property tax than a statewide uniform property tax. And I'm not, saying that you go one way, or the other on this, but I'm wondering if there's a position that can be, parsed out of this.
Yeah, I think since the questions were all framed more in terms of what's currently happening, the focus is much more on the local level versus a statewide property tax. That's my understanding.
Yeah, the question would be whether or not what impact a statewide property tax might have on those that cannot raise the same level of funding through a local initiative. I mean, it's a question. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, we heard a lot of concerns this morning in fiscal policy about a state property tax, a statewide property tax. Yeah. So we certainly recognize those concerns.
Yeah. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you.
I don't know, Jay, do you have any thoughts about the data that was just shared, particularly as it relates to adequacy?
There were two questions that I found they were intriguing to me. One was to read that comment from the Manchester Charter School person, and it just caused me to think back to the charter school presentation. And, given that special education is such a large weight of pupils and cost, it just caused me to think of, their $10,000 per student that they are getting in state aid on average versus not having any special education students. I mean, they may not be far off from what the actual cost per student is. Anyway, sorry, I drifted off on you, Carrie,
No.
when you read it, but it was an interesting comment on that person's perspective.
Right. And Jay, that's because the district of residence pays the special education costs. Is that right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah, that's right. That's where I was going.
Yeah.
And I was listening for, the poorer communities, the disparities that, I think that, I don't know, Mel, David, who, maybe Corrine brought up this question. Do we know how they feel, I guess, David, how they feel about local property tax versus a statewide property tax? What I think I heard even more uniformly is people feel bad about the disparities.
Yeah.
And I wonder just, what % of these comments, if we step back from, which tax or, how many of these comments are really directed at, it's just not fair. I mean, people have this, we may not know the solution. We just know, we can pretty commonly define what the problem is. So, I mean, that's an insight to take away. That's what we expect from our public engagement, is to hear that. I hope. Otherwise we can't target the problem. The solutions aren't going to be any better.
And the challenge is how do you find the appropriate resources to fill that void? We talk about zip codes and whether or not you've got an equal educational opportunity, regardless of your zip code, vis-a-vis where you actually live, and it's not equal. And I think the challenge is what's the state's responsibility for filling the gaps that you were talking about, Jay. What's fair is fair. I mean, we talk a lot about, this whole, we mentioned this issue, this whole workforce development stuff around the state. And if you want to have an equitable workforce development program, do kids, regardless of where they are, do they have an equitable opportunity to develop their skill sets, whether or not they're going to go into the workforce, or whether or not they're going to go on to a 2-year school or a trade school or a college or whatever? Do they have that same sense of equity as somebody that's in a more wealthy school district? I mean, that's a challenge that's the equity question that you've been dealing with in your work group.
I think we're all struggling. We wouldn't have the commission without that question.
Oh yeah. So so then the question comes down when you begin to look at filling that gap. Is there resolve within the state to recognize the gap and then to move to try to fill the gap? I mean, that, to me, from a philosophic standpoint, that's where we get to my comment about not my kids, but our kids across the state, not just the ones that are in my district. And I frankly think when you get down to the funding question of filling those gaps, that's where the real challenge is going to be for the commission. And it's not an easy one.
Mel, can I make
Yeah, Bruce.
a comment? So understanding that this data and this consensus that the current funding system creates a lot of inequities comes from educators, right? Comes from the community of educators in the state. And so on the one hand, we can treat that input as coming from people with professional judgment who have a more refined and deeper technical understanding of what happens when kids get educated in public schools and what the consequences of these disparities are for long-term outcomes. So this is kind of a professional judgment view of the current system, which, that judgment finds it wanting. I want to just raise the other, sort of another dimension of that, is that there will be folks who say, well, of course, these are educators. This is a self-interested group who always think that we should be putting more money into the system in order to create better outcomes in the way of things like teacher salaries, which we know is a critical variable. So I just think there are two sides of this, of this data that we as a commission, you all as a commission, I should say, need to be prepared to address. And that is the value of professional judgment and the concerns that educators will always be asking for more money. No matter how much you give them, they'll never be satisfied, to put it in a kind of extreme way.
Yeah.
Bruce, where I thought you might be going with that is, yes, this is a professional judgment group, but we can compare the predominant view of the problem to other groups. And do they all see this as the predominant problem? So that's where I thought. So it's not a, it's an ordinal variable, but between group differences, if there are differences, if they're not, then we've got a common issue that we all recognize statewide in different groups and across the state. So I think this is our first test, right? Why are people concerned about education funding?
Yeah, and we'll be able to compare these results with our Granite State Poll survey when we have that data, which is random representative sample of all residents of the state. And then with our focus groups, which include 65 and older, taxpayer associations, young people, high school students, recent students. So this is a good reminder, especially for those that are listening, that this is just one set of data that's going to be triangulated against multiple other sources of engagement from different kinds of constituents. Then we'll see what the degree of consensus is.
That's a good point. Carrie?
And I would also say that this is like very tip of the iceberg of the data that we're even talking about. Like there's quite a few codes that we have identified in the next report that we'll share with you, and they're focused on, some people talked about student performance, people talked about career and college readiness, and we'll have quotes that we've highlighted and we'll pull out and we'll read to kind of hear, the voices of people, even though we can't have everybody here in this box. We'll pull out some of those quotes. There are people who talked about the bureaucratic barriers and the leadership barriers, and where it does dive in a little bit more of like that complexity of like, you can't just keep asking for more money, or like the different viewpoints of just the reality is of within district tensions between the communities that are in a district. So there are many other perspectives that we're going to be sharing next time. This was really just pulling out a few examples to go along with this more kind of overall satisfaction data. And yes, it'll be looking at it from, we have the municipal and school leader focus group report. And we'll take each of these reports and kind of look across them. Hopefully the work group and commission members can look across them. We'll look across them, and we'll kind of pull out some common trends, or maybe some different viewpoints that keep coming up. So I just want to say that there's many other perspectives embedded in this data that we'll seek to share with you next time.
And that's go ahead, David.
So along to that point, I think to Mel's the point you bring up have brought up even since before the commission was started, the not my kids but our kids, embracing public education as a public interest. We've certainly all heard comments that are opposite of that. And I guess I don't think there were very many comments from this survey group that were contrary to public education being in the public interest, largely because I think of the professional nature of the group. But I hope we're going to get some. We're going to be surveying people that may feel that way, and I wonder also if there's a connection between maybe, feeling that public education is not in the public interest, if there's a connection between that feeling and basically the lack of tax fairness or tax equity that we have. Said another way, if we had a more fair tax system, would people generally be more agreeable to public education being in the public interest, or a not my kids but our kids?
Well, and I think we have one of the issues we've got here now is, I mean, we heard this morning, David, in your work group, you know, you had what, 19% of those who live in Portsmouth are under the age of 18. You know, and it used to be years ago, where you'd have three quarters of the taxpayers would have students, children in school. Now you have, you know, less than, at least in Portsmouth,
20%.
less than 20% in school. So the question that I think that people have to look at is that where does the issue of public education stand as it relates to obligations to fund the future? And I think it's more complicated if you don't have kids in school, or if you forgot you had kids in school, or where your grandkids are in school. I mean, what's the self-interest here, other than, you know, a general feeling of the need to have an educated populace. And if I'm struggling with my own economics at home, trying to keep my family, or at least my home, without having to forfeit it because of taxes, it becomes a struggle.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it becomes a struggle. And I think our plan is for the engagement group down the road, as Carrie said, I think briefly, we do plan to talk to 65 plus folks. We do plan to talk to taxpayers in an attempt to try to get to what you were saying.
You're talking
Right.
about taxpayer associations.
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
getting to your point, David, well, where is that contrary viewpoint?
Mm-hmm.
And at what point, if you've got a contrarian viewpoint to, let's say, the professional educators, well, exactly how deep does that go? What are the alternatives within that contrarian point of view? So that is part of the scheme of things that the public engagement group is going to be engaged in as we get into the fall program of talking with people, as well as students. I mean, I think student voice, they may not understand the complications of school funding, but they sure as heck understand the issue of inequity as they talk to their peers across the state, and they say, well, gee, you know, we've got these many AP classes. Why don't you have any? You don't have any foreign language class in your school now? They understand that. They understand that inequity. They may not understand the funding of it, but they understand the opportunity for equal educational opportunity. So, any other comments around the preliminary review here? Thank you so much, Carrie and Sarah, for doing that. It was interesting. I've talked with particularly Sarah, dealing about the coding of open-ended questions. I mean, so I asked them at one point in time, I said, well, what's a code? And they begin to look at particular words. They look at words and phrases that have particular meaning, and those are the codes that they begin to try to then piece together in some kind of a similar mosaic of responses. And so I really appreciate your taking it. It's not an easy task when you're dealing with open-ended questions. So thank you very much for doing that. And I look forward to the final report. Carrie, can you put up the slide of our activities, the schematic that you've got for the activities that we have ahead of us?
I have a few documents prepped here on my screen, so hold on just a second here.
So this is our task, folks, between now and mid-November. So you can see, can you give us a little update, Carrie, on where we are? Why don't we start with the survey that's about to be conducted next month as we conclude the questions for that. Give us an update on where the Granite State survey is.
Yep, so I received an email this morning from the Survey Center with a final set of questions. And so I'll ask that the engagement work group and the executive team look at that, and then we'll ask them to move forward with putting the questions in the Granite State poll, and then they'll provide us a report of the findings. So that's moving right along, and we'll have those findings soon, which will be really helpful, I think, and informative to see, you know, what's common from what we've learned so far, and maybe what's a little different. Bruce has reached out to the stakeholders that convened in March 2020 and are going to have another meeting with them to talk about updates of the commission, to have a discussion. Bruce, do you want to say any more about that?
No, except that we expect a positive response. I've already gotten a lot of yes RSVPs. And so this will be an opportunity for us to share back with those education associations and key stakeholders the thinking of the commission to date, and asking them essentially what's missing here, what you'll be emphasizing or paying special attention to as we now move into the phase of identifying possible solutions.
The date for that, Bruce, is what?
That's September 9th.
9th, okay. All right. And that's from 3 to 4:30?
And that's from 4 to 5:30.
Okay. And so members of this work group can listen in on that conversation, correct?
Yeah, commission members are of course invited to listen in. They won't. This is not a commission meeting per se. We won't be conducting any business, but any and all commission members are welcome to be a part of the conversation.
And then we have public comments on the 16th and the 30th, correct?
Yes, that's correct. And those are on the commission calendar, and I believe we'll have more than that. Those are just the ones that are just in the next month.
Okay.
We'll be continuing those right into October.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how are we coming on the student voice, the two focus groups there for into September and early October?
So these two, the student voice and the stakeholder focus groups part, well, I'm calling part 2, for lack of better words right now. So I've just started outlining, I've put in some preliminary dates and looking at distribution lists for that. That's something I want to talk about with this group today, about strategies for that. We want to make sure that, you know, there's voices from across the state. And so the way that I've been creating the distribution lists, I feel like we'll have that, but I just want to check in with everybody. And we have a preliminary guide. It's very simple. Originally, before the pandemic, we wanted to gather students less so in a focus group format, but because of the pandemic and just people are in different modes of gathering and not gathering in person, we're going to do a similar format to what we did with the school and municipal employee groups in June. And Reaching Higher New Hampshire has some materials that they're preparing that are, there's a video that should be available soon. And some accessible materials that we can share with students ahead of time so that they can have an informed discussion. And I'm working with the New Hampshire Listens team to think a little bit more about that. That is something that's also on the agenda today, is to talk about, you know, when we think about all of the information, especially as we move into these final focus groups, thinking about perspectives we haven't heard, making sure we're reaching out to people we haven't heard from, or perspectives that we're interested in learning more about. What is the most important information to share with them at this point that's accessible, that allows people to have an informed discussion about this topic? And we may or may not have all the answers here, but a discussion about it will help guide what we put together. And so that's where we're at with student voice. I think, we're going to reach out to school and district leaders. There are quite a few youth organizing groups and youth leader groups that we'll reach out to in terms of student government, students of color, and some others. So I think hopefully we'll have a good showing in the student voice. We'll see how many people show up on, how many students participate on September 23rd, which is the first student voice focused public commenting. And then based on how that goes, we'll do some further outreach to make sure we really hear youth voices. I'm capping these focus groups at 30 each, just for staffing purposes, and just the amount of data that we'll have to process. And I do have preliminary dates for these meetings that I'll be putting out later on this week.
What do you need from us, Carrie?
So I think what I need from the work group today is I'll share the student focus group design to look at some of the questions. There was something early on when we asked the work groups to respond about the task before them. And so the engagement work group, we've identified some key groups to recruit to engagement events. So we've continued to have that conversation. We're reviewing the input from these activities, having discussions about them, reviewing the summaries, and identifying key findings. Something that came up from the responses of these tasks early on from the work groups was just making sure that there are some educational materials that go along with these discussions. And so, New Hampshire Listen staff, we can work together to decide what those are, but if there's certain things from you all, the commission, commission members that you think are important to include, we want to make sure we include those as well as questions. We've been asking similar questions. I sent for this meeting, I sent kind of a summary of all the questions we've asked so far. And so whether we want to have people look at that and say, what are some questions we want to continue to ask, or we can have a response via email as if that's appropriate, is okay as well. I just want to make sure as we're designing these final engagement activities that we're asking the questions and presenting information that this group feels will be helpful.
The Reaching Higher, Carrie and I have talked with Reaching Higher, and they are in the process of concluding, how would you characterize it, Carrie? I don't want to say it's a cartoon, but it's...
well, Reaching Higher is here listening in. And so I'm not sure if anyone listening can speak to what they have prepared so far if they want to. Oh, I see a hand, so let's let them in to talk about it a little bit.
Hi there, it's Liz Canada here.
Hey Liz, how are you? Why don't you explain to the group the approach that you guys are taking to create your visual for an orientation to school funding?
Sure thing. So we're creating about a 5-minute video to take the very complicated process of school funding and make it a bit more accessible to folks who are perhaps unlike all of us who are even listening in to this commission meeting, who don't really think about it on a day-to-day basis. So we're doing that through the lens of a high school student's perspective, of a student who moves from one town to another town and is sort of seeing how the experience in those two communities can be vastly different. And then sort of talking through the formula a bit, the process by which communities raise their funds, what that looks like, and what goes into those variables, and a bit about the work of the commission itself too, of what's going on in that process. So a really quick overview to get the viewer, whether a student or whether a person who's interested in learning more, better acclimated to the topic at hand. So we have a final script that we've completed. I've shared that with Carrie. And we have a media company that is working on the animations for it to make it a bit more dynamic rather than whatever I could do on my laptop. That is not my expertise, and I am totally okay with that.
Is there a written handout that can go with that?
Yes, I believe we are working with New Hampshire Listens on that discussion guide as well to support folks in understanding the video as well.
Good. Are there questions from the committee to Liz regarding the collaboration that we're working with Reaching Higher on this? Okay. Sounds good.
Thanks. Enjoy the rest of your meeting.
Thanks, Liz. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Liz.
Okay, Susan.
I have a question for Carrie. Since we're talking about having college students complete the survey, I wouldn't say that they were particularly well versed in funding either. So would that video be available for students to see before they completed the survey if they wanted to?
Yeah.
So the students, for the student voice, it'll be 2 focus groups. So they're going to be in they're going to be in mid-October. I have them tentatively scheduled for.
Yeah, I saw that to the 23rd, and I can't. So you weren't thinking in terms.
Those are the public. Those are the public commenting sessions. So there's 2 types of student engagement.
All right.
We're inviting students in to come to a public commenting session and give. Was the word testimony, or they're providing their thoughts on school funding in a more formal way where they say something for 5 to 10 minutes, much like the public commenting sessions that have already occurred. And then there are student focus groups where students will have more of a conversation with each other based on some questions like we did with the municipal and school leaders. So there's kind of these 2 different activities. And right now trying to figure out how to get the word out in a way in time with this video and discussion guide so students do have some information. I have reached out to some people in the community who work with youth to talk about their issues that they have interest in, and so they're used to working with youth to help them with public comment. And so this will be a chance there'll be, I'm sorry if I'm muddling my words, I'm thinking through the logistics of all this in terms of recruitment right now. And so for college students, yes, they'll use the same, I think they can use the same materials. We're focused on high school students and first-year college students that went to public schools in New Hampshire. And I think they can each use the materials. And if for the focus groups, if they have not had a chance to review them ahead of time, we're going to show them at the beginning of the focus groups so that everyone has a chance to listen before they talk. And there will be times for clarifying questions with students if they want to know a little bit more. And so it'll be a combination of learning and talking at the same time.
Thank you.
I hope that's helpful.
It is. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other feedback to Carrie and Sarah? Yeah, David.
Yeah, Mel, thanks. This actually to Bruce on the September 9th stakeholders reprise. Is that going to be a posted public meeting? Oh.
You're muted, Bruce. You're muted, Bruce.
All right. Maybe we should clarify that. The prior one in March was not posted as a public meeting. It was announced, but not posted. My comment earlier that there will be no commission business conducted at that September 9th meeting, I think was meant to cover that issue. That is, we'll announce it but not post it. However, I recognize that if a quorum of commission members decide to listen in, even if they don't say anything, if we have a quorum present, then it should retroactively have been posted. It should be posted. So I'll take your guidance on that, and we can post it.
Yeah, because if we've got a quorum of commission members, then it's by definition a meeting.
Yeah.
And I'm sort of thinking that we don't necessarily need commission members at that as the first one, Carsey School can report out on that meeting. We don't need to be influencing it in any way, unless you'd like maybe Mel and Jay and I, as work group chairs to be there. But I certainly wouldn't have more than I wouldn't have more than 6 commission members.
Yeah, for the March one, I think. Well, Jay was able to attend the latter part of the meeting in March, so we can clarify that with the full commission prior to the 9th.
Okay. Great. Yeah, and we just got to be cognizant of the summer calendar schedule, I guess. So for posting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Carrie, what else does the work group need to give you some advice on and some guidance on?
So I guess I would like if the work group could look at the summary of questions I sent. These are all the questions that we have put forth to the public at this point. I can also share it on the screen.
Please do.
Thinking about what are the questions we want to continue to put forward and what are some new questions? There's also, in the response to the task from this work group, there's also some thoughts about continuing to ask similar questions so that there's comparability. So for instance, the questions we asked on the school leader, the school and district employee survey are very, very similar, if not identical, to the questions we asked municipal and school leader focus groups. So those questions were similar, if not exactly the same. The questions we asked the stakeholder group were a little different because it was an early stage of engagement. So this is school, and then the grant state poll, the questions kind of shifted substantially in terms of what we were asking, and we're more specific in terminology. And so my question for all of you moving forward is, and this is a brainstorming session. What are some, and it can be, they don't have to be specifically formulated, just in a general sense, like what are the questions we want to ask next? Do we want to stick with similar ones to this survey and the focus group, or do we want to dive in a little deeper based on what we know now and what the discussions have brought forth from commission meetings?
Well, one of the questions I would have, I think, is as the work groups begin to identify a deeper meaning to the report from AIR, specifically around the adequacy questions that Jay is working with his group and David working with his fiscal group, whether or not some of those questions from those conversations might be a little sharper than some of the general questions that we've been asking, just as to get a sense of where people were in general. I'm not sure, Jay, what you and David seem about that, but it would seem to me as we get closer into November particularly, that those inquiries might be a little more direct than just general questions.
Maybe I think we're getting it'd be interesting to see where our conversations go, because we're certainly in the work group, adequacy work group, we're talking about a model and the details of the model. So we're at the detail level right now. If you want that kind of assistance, I think we're going to have to step out of our current role and pose that. I mean, I'm glad to do that. I have the good fortune of the group is convening in another hour. And we could ask that at the end of the meeting, that the engagement group is looking for, what are the big questions now? That we, you know, now we're getting some agreement as to how to put an adequate education, or the costs for an adequate education, together. What are some of the big questions that we want input on? And I think we're going to have to, so we'll just have to step out of our role of trying to parse all the pieces and what's important about the whole.
Yeah, I think, I agree with Jay on this. I would also add that, I mean, I think a lot of the answers that or the solutions that we're going to, I shouldn't say answers, really solutions that we might be looking at or might even recommend towards the end of this trip is are really based on 12 months or more of weekly, sometimes bi-weekly meetings, and really a lot of unearthing and a lot of detail, and I think the commission certainly needs to be guided by, you know, public interest in different areas, but with the questions asked at an appropriately high level, and I like the way Jay put it, big questions, so that we get general direction, but not necessarily fine-tuned direction in areas, because I think that's going to certainly be guided by public feedback, but also informed by 12 plus months of work. If that made any sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, if there's time during your work group to brainstorm questions, that's fine. If people want, I can take we have these questions, we have critical questions that have come up that Bruce summarized. And so we can also, formulate the questions as well. I just wanted to put it out to this group and to the other work groups, if there are pressing questions we want to include that people can think of, we can consider those. And I just wanted to make sure I offered the opportunity for input on the questions that we're putting into these designs as well. So those, so people are welcome to send those to me at any time to help inform the process. But otherwise, I mean, I think we have quite a bit of information to work off of in terms of what questions we can ask.
But I think what we're hearing, though, is that I think from each of the two other work groups, I think I liked, Jay, the way you put that. What are the big questions that we want from the input from the public? That would take us to the next level as we begin to engage others in this work. I think I like that. I like that. Okay. Anything else on that?
I should ask, what's your timeline there, Carrie, Mel, to you're going to need this fairly soon, I assume.
Yeah.
You want to help
Yeah.
your guides for those sessions.
Yeah, because we're going to start having some of those conversations, you know, in another couple of weeks.
And we should think of the audiences, right? I mean,
Yeah.
So I think we can probably frame this more generally, but I think more specifically, I think Mel and Carrie, you might want to frame, you know, back to your table, but we don't really need the table. That there are these 5 constituency groups or something like that, and are there specific questions you'd like to ask of all of these groups? Are there some that are more specific to others? And then, anyway, I think, but
Yeah, general versus specific.
and give us the timeline for it. But my guess is you're not going to get anything for 2 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And we can do that offline too, Carrie.
Yeah, that's fine. 2 weeks
Yeah.
is okay.
Yeah.
Because the outreach and promotion, you know, we'll create the questions after we, you know, after we start that promotion. So that design can kind of happen as we go. So 2 weeks is fine. The first, you know, the Taxpayer Association Grant Temley, I haven't even scheduled it yet, but I'm thinking October 1st. So that'll be the first one. So we have a month to kind of decide what questions. So I can start framing that. I think, Jay, the way you know, what are the broad questions we want to ask, and then what are the specific questions of each of these groups is helpful. And people can fill out, I'll create a table and people can fill out what they think via email, if that's okay. And then we can share designs later, if that makes sense.
Yep.
It does.
Okay. Yep. Okay. The other question I had, Carrie, do we need to do anything more with the survey from the UNH, or the questions from the survey from UNH? Are those all locked in now? They've been sent over. They're locked in, correct now?
So they sent the final questions me today. If people want to take one more look in terms of this group, that's fine. Otherwise, Bruce is saying, no, they're done. The boss has spoken.
Okay.
We're going to move on with the questions, and yeah, they're all set. They'll be in
you may want, have you sent those final questions out to everybody? I know I've gotten a copy of them.
I sent them to this group, I believe, and or I may have just sent them to Jay, Dave,
Okay.
Mel, and then the CARC team.
All right, good. Okay. All right, thank you for doing that. Other issues that we need to deal with in the remaining time we have? Have we covered everything? Any questions of the group? I need to ask Susan, how are you doing in getting ready to open up and start and everything? How's that going for you?
Well, today's the first day of classes with students on campus. We keep checking every half an hour with every college, and so far things are going well.
And how's the enrollment going?
It's down.
Is it down?
I think that we're down double digits right now. We are going to have a semester that begins in 3 weeks. So it's a 12-week, and then we have another one that starts right around Halloween. That's a 7-week. In talking to students, the 2 biggest issues they have are if they are parents and they're unsure what's happening with their children.
Yeah.
And if they have children at home, they don't have the money to do childcare as well. And then the other piece is that many of the students are essential workers, and they're still working overtime in their respective jobs. And so their ability to fit in any level of college right now is pretty diminished.
Yeah.
So we're working with them to see what we can do. You know, we did get a scholarship from the Gopher money, and that has helped. We've had almost 1,000 students apply for that money, so that's on top of all the funding that had already come through. So that will be 1,000 more people who come back to school sooner rather than later. But, you know, all things considered, we're okay. Thank you for
Good.
asking.
Okay, good. Well, you're in our thoughts as you're getting your reports back from your various colleges and all that stuff. That's good. So, any other comments for the good of the order before we close this session? None there. Thank you very much for your time, and we will see you next week. Some of us will see,
or 3 o'clock.
or 3 o'clock, right? Exactly. Thanks, guys. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.